Pa bom pa tudi še malo višji stopil. Dobrodošli vsi skupaj na drugem Tiamsi, na drugem dogodku Tiamsa CEE, verjetno bolj prav reči. Zadeva se je začela nekje pred 2 leti, ko smo nekateri iz Slovenije, kjer se tradicionalno jamra o trgu z umetninami, in se v njem govori ponavadi v nekih negativnih terminih, začeli razmišljati, da bi bilo mogoče narediti kaj finega, da bi to zgodbo spremenili v pozitivno smer. In v približno istem času izvedeli tudi za eno združenje, ki se imenuje Tiamsa in se ukvarja z raziskovanjem umetniškega trga. Temu združenju smo se pridružili, ustanovili eno podsekcijo, ki se zdaj imenuje Tiamsa CEE in poskušamo znanja, ki že obstajajo, prinašati v slovenski prostor, na drugi strani pa generirati tista, ki bi mogla že dolgo tega nekako biti ustvarjena, premišljena in razdelana. In zdaj v okviru tega, zato da sodelujemo s publiko in prenašamo ta znanja tudi v javni prostor, pripravljamo serijo predavanj, torej to je drugo izmed njih, kakor sem že povedala. Prvo je bilo predavanje Polone Lovšin o tem, kako nastaja zbirka Riko konkretno. Tokrat smo pa povabili kolegico iz Hrvaške, Tihano Puc, ki nam bo povedala nekaj, kaj se dogaja na drugi strani meje s sodobno umetnostjo, kako se ta trži, koliko se trži lokalno in kako se trži mednarodno. Zdaj, da še nekaj povem o naši predavateljici. Diplomirala iz umetnostne zgodovine, etnologije na Fakulteti za humanistične in družbene vede v Zagrebu, potem doktorirala iz upravljanja in razvoja kulturne dediščine v Lucchi v Italiji. Zaposlena je bila kot znanstvena sodelavka na oddelku za umetnostno zgodovino na Fakulteti za humanistične in družbene vede Univerze na Reki. Bila je tudi kustosinja v Muzeju sodobne umetnosti v Zagrebu in trenutno deluje kot višja strokovna svetovalka na Ministrstvu za kulturo Republike Hrvaške, zaradi česar jo občasno boli hrbet. Tihana, predajam besedo in se veselim tega, kar boš povedala. Hvala.
Hvala najlepša, hvala na pozivu. Jaz se opravičujem, ko bom govorila v angleščini, ampak ja, ne morem pomagati. Moja slovenščina ni dovolj dobra, da bi predavanje bilo v slovenščini. Tako da najbolj, da začnem. Okay. I will first give you the basic structure of my presentation. As you can see on the slide, I will begin with some basic concepts that you're probably all familiar with, but they are relevant for my today's presentation and for the discussion. And then I will turn to the contemporary art market in Croatia, and from there to the impact of the international market on contemporary artists from Croatia. And actually I'm going to focus on that since the development in Croatia is rather scarce, as I will refer to later on. And finally I will conclude more or less with the career paths of artists from Croatia. So today I'm going to focus on contemporary visual art and on the one that is circulating through the international art system, which is in its essence the Western system as we know it. And by art system I refer to two parts that are kind of overlapping, that converge but diverge as well. And in that division I follow many scholars, and I listed only a couple of them here on the slide, that use this division. For example, French sociologist Raymond Moulin distinguishes between the institutional system and the art market. Nathalie Moreau uses the reference to the institutional world and the world of art market, which kind of stands for the private and the public sphere. Isabelle Gros also internally differentiates between the commercial market and market of knowledge, which is the market of exhibitions, publications, symposia, and so on. If we focus on contemporary art market, then as you well know, Often we use the division in three parts, which is the primary market where the artworks are sold by the artist, the secondary where the artist is not active and the works are sold by the dealer, and tertiary, which is the auction market. Though very often the division in two parts, the primary market, first time sale, and secondary resale market are used as well. But what I'm particularly interested in today is the assumption that they both play a relevant role in the construction of artist's international career. That is something that Raymond Moulin claimed, that it is precisely at the intersection of the international and commercial market that the value is constructed and that artist success is to situate. For example, Alain Keman, in testing the assumption, claimed that today the market is far more important than the institutions. But then again, in his research, he found that two universes diverge as well. In particular, for example, for Chinese artists that are far more successful at auctions than in institutions. Femke van Hest, in her research on globalization, as well claimed that for an artist to have an international career, that he needs to be visible in both, in the market and institutions. So these are just some basic concepts around the institutional, international career. And to them, I need to add the term career as well, which to my knowledge has not been extensively discussed in the artistic context. But for example, Nathalie Heinig claimed that, well, more questioned, is it appropriate at all to use the term career for artists, since the career implies standardization of trajectories and hierarchical progression, and the entry into the career is the gallery representation, while the ultimate success would be, of course, entry into the museum. So artists that are not represented by a gallery would be artists without a career, let's say, and that is something that I will return to later on as well. And today, even if the roles of the operators in the institutional sphere and the market are more and more interchangeable and more overlapping, and by today I mean for the last 3 decades, still the controversial relationship between the symbolic value and the economic value is continuously readdressed. And here I listed only several of empirical studies that dealt with, that kind of measured the homology, the level of homology between the institutional and market world. I'm not going back to Bourdieu and the beginnings of the discussion, but just to some relatively or more recent empirical studies that I will refer to later on as well. So this was just, if you want to take the photo, this was just some kind of basic concepts and sort of some kind of conceptual introductory framework. I'm sorry. And now I will pass to some context, and that is the situation in Croatia and the art market in Croatia, and that is going to be a rather brief reflection, since the discussion about the contemporary art system in Croatia revolves mainly around one segment, and that is the institutional sphere. The art market is most commonly described as non-existent, considering its slow and unstructured development, the fact that legal framework has not been elaborated, that most of the transactions are unregulated, belong to the so-called gray zone, that there is no strategy in the field, and so on. And research is scarce as well. On one side, I believe that there is kind of a lack of interest, the assumption that there is no market, so why even do any research since there is nothing out there. And on the other hand, the chronic lack of data is not helping the situation, and the data lacks not only on market, but on arts and culture in general. To my knowledge, there is only one publication that was specifically devoted to the topic of the market, and it's given here on the slide, but that brought more of like general reflections or considerations than any specific findings for Croatia. The only maybe exception is publication by a study by Žuvala and Jelincic that kind of more or less mapped the entire contemporary art system and not only the market. Of course, today I cannot cover all the elements that would be relevant. I can just mention some basic features. And primary reason is the fact that what I'm interested in particular today is the gallery system and the gallery system in its international context. So basic elements of the market do exist. There are some private galleries, there are some art fairs, maybe more attempts to establish the fairs, some in Rovinj in Istria, some in Zagreb. So we can talk about some kind of secondary market. There is an auction house, so there is tertiary segment as well, but still most of the sales are directly from the artist studio without any receipt, and they mostly belong to the gray market. However, what is relevant for today's discussion is that most of these initiatives have a local or at best a regional character. None of these galleries operate truly internationally, and that means representing artists from Croatia and foreign artists as well, and regularly participate in the art fairs. There are some galleries that do participate in fairs, namely Gallery Kranjčar from Zagreb, and there are some non-for-profits that are participating in art fairs internationally, more again regionally, Italy, Austria, and maybe Hungary. Our non-for-profits that participate in the fairs are, for example, Art Radionica Lazareti from Dubrovnik, Apoteka from Vodnjan, Galerija Miroslav Kraljević, and so on. But apart from them, the international character of the market is mostly absent. And as we all well know, the function of the gallery is not only to sell artists, but it's sell art, but as well to promote and support the artists and to promote them internationally, but that character is kind of missing, even though the foundations were led already in Yugoslavia. And here I will devote a couple of sentences to an example that I believe it's very interesting, but that is very often overlooked in the discussions of the art market. And that is Gallery Dante Marino Cetina, that was founded in 1985 in Umag in Istria. And it is considered to be one of the first galleries in private galleries in Eastern Europe. And what is particularly interesting is that from the beginning, Cetina's activity was international. To give you some idea, the artists that Cetina exhibited were artists such as Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Jones, Andres Serrano, Ed Ruscha, and so on. He collaborated with galleries that are by now truly famous, like Leo Castelli from New York, Barbara Gladstone Gallery. He initiated collaboration with London, with at that time Interim Gallery. He participated during the 90s in the fairs, such as Armory, at that time called Gramercy International, at Arte in Rome. He represented some artists from Croatia that over time gained a considerable international status, such as Slaven Tolj or Mladen Stilinović or Goran Trbuljak. He represented artists from Slovenia, such as Irvin, for example. I don't know how well you see on the slide, but here are some of the artists, all of the artists that he represented. But after his death in 1998, the gallery remained discontinuously active for a while, but closed its doors definitely in 2013, since it was not receiving any support either from local or from state funds. The question is, why is that legacy kind of completely lost? Cetina remained an isolated episode, sometimes referred to as a miracle from Umag. Marina Gržinić defined him as an anomaly within the socialist system of the 80s. But after him, no gallery of a comparable profile was established, and no gallery that would establish a bridge with the international system, and in particular at the higher end of the system. So over time, basically the only source of relevant representations in the international sphere for the artists from Croatia became the Western system. But even in entering the system, the artists from Croatia are in a position of inequality, since they receive no preparation during the studies. For example, in France, as Benedict Martin stressed, all the artists have equal access to the initial tests, since they all receive preparation during the studies for further integration into the market. And in the case of artists from Croatia, it is primarily the individual effort that kind of leads to the establishment of that bridge. As for example, Damir Očko described the situation at the academy as well. As you can see on the slide, he said at the academy you learn the basics, you learn to draw well, and that's it. Everything else you learn outside the system, the system of the academy. For example, when I finished the studies, I didn't even know how the private galleries function. I discovered that only during the residence in Vienna. So as the budget of institutions for the acquisitions is diminishing, and the system basically did not establish in Croatia, the international art market became more important, and I will pass to that now. So everything that I'm going to say about the dealer market and its impact on the artists from Croatia derives from my research on the globalization processes and their impact on the artists from Croatia after 1989. To examine these processes, I concentrated on artist international circulation and their consecration within the international system, and I studied them primarily through their exhibition activity. Why exhibitions? Because exhibitions indicate in Bourdieu's term artistic consecration, and their study proved to bring valuable knowledge about, of course, artist circulation, about the construction of their careers, and about the networks of institutions and actors involved. And I will mention on just a couple of examples that are kind of relevant in that respect. Among the legendary or traditional examples is the White studies on the Impressionists. And even if today their conclusions are by and large rejected, still their methodology was picked up and it was innovative for the time. The Whites counted, among other things, the exhibitions that Impressionists participated in and that enabled them to reconstruct the stages through which their careers developed. Another example is, to my knowledge, wonderful research by Sophie Richard on the network of conceptual artists between 67 and 77, in which she, via the analysis of exhibitions, reconstructed the development of careers of conceptual artists and as well the network of institutions and artists. The research of that kind intensified in particular with the affirmation of quantitative methods in art history and subsequent developments in digital art history, and I listed on the slide only a couple of projects that are dealing with the exhibitions. So in the research that I'm presenting today, the exhibitions were considered as captures of artist international mobility, but what is even more important, as indices of consecration, they provided means of exploring the development of their careers. For the research, I firstly needed to collect the data, since basically no data on contemporary artists in Croatia exists, no source of structured data in any case exists, and artifacts, which is often used by empirical researchers, for Croatian artists is not particularly reliable. Here on the slide I just listed a couple of errors, as for example Nemanja Cvijanović being a female artist, or barely any data on Rijeka on Artist Info. So I collected the data on exhibitions from the artists themselves, and I as well double-checked them with other sources to avoid the errors. And the same case was for gallery representations. I collected the data from the artists, since artifacts was rather unreliable in that respect as well. Many times the information that I received from artists did not correspond to those on the Artifacts.net. For example, Artifacts.net would list a gallery that artist only collaborated with, at times only once, but what was not representing the artist. And moreover, what was important was to know the year when the gallery representation began, to establish its impact on the development of the career. I focused on the artists that were born, whose emergence paralleled the developments after 1989, and I selected 51 artists born between 61 and 82, and 10 artists of older generation born before 60, to among other things, see if their careers developed or were constructed any differently. On the slide, you can see the basic characteristic of the sample and selection criteria. And I collected the data for 20-year period from 1991 to 2012. Following the 20 years of exhibition activity for younger artists enabled me to follow their careers from its initial stage. The data includes 6,400 exhibition participations, so not single exhibitions, as many artists participated in same group exhibitions, in 1,905 institutions. And institutions were distinguished in the data set according to the type, museum, gallery, exhibition center, and so on, to see the institutional logic of artist movement, and as well according to the character, commercial and non-commercial. So that enabled me to see to what extent is an artist present in the commercial sphere and to what extent was he present in the institutional sphere. So what I must emphasize, I was not dealing with the prices. I was comparing the visibility of the artist within two spheres and comparing the choices of curators and versus choices of gallerists and dealers. And basically that was the only possibility regarding the data, because the data on the secondary market is not available. Which remains a permanent problem for researching the dealer market, which represents almost 50% of the sales globally. But that did enable me to see the difference between their presence in two spheres and how they participate within their careers. But I was not dealing with the artist success, commercial success per se, even if being exhibited by a gallery and above all being represented by a gallery is an indication of commercial success, since galleries rather drop the artists than reduce the prices. So the galleries get rid of the artists if they are not selling them, rather than reducing the prices, according to research by Olaf Welthuis on galleries in New York and Amsterdam, for example. And this approach regarding the data was to a certain level followed as well by empirical researchers that are given here on the slide. Some of them compared the rankings of, for example, Artfaktsnet and Artprice, as did Bull, or they compared the participations in European museums versus participations in Art Basel, as did Stefano Karierni. And before going back to that, I will basically begin with presenting you some findings. Some of you already saw this video, but some didn't. This will give you an idea of the overall movement of artists from Croatia. This video doesn't include the entire sample. It includes 49 artists, but the situation is more or less the same. And I will immediately go to the end of the period, so you see the situation in 2012, which is not dramatically different than the situation at the beginning. But if you see, which is probably not the case because it's too small, but if you could see, you would notice that the number of the exhibitions in commercial galleries is growing, and that is the ones that are outlined with black. So when we, no? Yes. When we look at the entire exhibition, at the overall exhibition activity of the artists from Croatia, outside Croatia, we see that the non-commercial sphere is dominant. It's overwhelmingly, outweighing the commercial sphere. Only 11% of the exhibitions were in commercial galleries and art fairs, and 49 artists from the sample participated in them, while 12 artists from the sample never participated in any exhibition in a commercial gallery. However, the share of the commercial pool is growing, and I will return to that later on. The fact that the institutional sphere is so dominant is not surprising, considering its growth over the last couple of decades, but still its dominance is striking. considering the fact that the commercial pole was growing as well. Though, as I mentioned previously, the institutional bridges towards the international sphere from Croatia do exist, while those of the commercial mainly do not. And in that sense, Croatia can barely participate in the transfer of its artists, which makes the fact that their space, the international is for the most part institutional, less surprising. So curators are the gatekeepers from Croatia and not the galleries that are promoting the artist internationally. And on the very art market itself as well, as I mentioned, many non-for-profits participate in the art fairs, so they add to that as well. What is particularly noteworthy is that 79% of these exhibitions were held after 2004, and with the exception of Bratzo Dimitrijević, who relocated to the West and integrated into the scene already in the 70s, they to a large extent pertain to the artists that are born after 1970. And the share of the market for them is greater, as you can see on the slide. But even when that share rises, as it does in their case, the non-commercial sphere never falls below 80%. When we look at the museum shows, then we can see that there, unsurprisingly, that the older generation of artists dominates, which is kind of confirming the hierarchical structure of the institutional field. But when we look at the younger generation, we see that the museum and gallery come quite close, and that is as well the point that I will return to later on. When we compare the geographical, the map of the institutions and the art market, they are different, since there are still many areas where the market did not develop or it's not very significant. The number of countries, the total number of countries where the artist exhibited is 71. But when we look only at the exhibitions in galleries and art fairs, then the number decreases to 30, and the territory of ex-Yugoslavia almost disappears. The countries that are dominating or that are most important are the same Western countries that dominate the overall movement of the artist. So Germany, Italy, and United States in particular for the galleries, and Italy and Austria in particular for the fairs. I will not enter into the role each country played, even if they differ, mainly for the ways artists enter the market. But just to mention some, to Italy, artists still very often move for educational reasons, and then they subsequently integrate into the market. While for the same is the case is the Netherlands, while for example in Austria it was much more through corporate collecting and focus on Eastern Europe that artists were entering the market. In Slovenia it's again much more the closeness and the familiarity with the scene that led to some of the representations, like for example Gregor Podnar and Škuc. Overall, the role of Italy is the greatest, and I will come to that back again later on. Now I will pass to the galleries that are representing the artist. Well, first of all, the general situation is that a large portion of artists is unrepresented. That's not only the case in Croatia. The study of regional art market in France found that an important part of the local artistic economy is situated outside the gallery system. So since the system didn't really develop in Croatia, of course the number of unrepresented artists is only higher. All the representations that I will discuss or mention here occurred during the first and beginning of the second decade of 21st century. And that is as well when the attitude of the artists towards the market started changing. Their kind of awareness of the international market started growing, and that is as well signaling the higher response of the international market towards the art from the region. I chose words of Sandro Đukić that illustrate the changed attitude, as you can see them on the slide, and I will read them. The market was considered as something problematic. That was the atmosphere I grew in. When I was at the first year of my studies in Düsseldorf, I received an offer from a gallerist in Amsterdam, which I rejected without hesitating, because at that time it seemed more important to exhibit at PM Gallery, Ljubljana, Škuc, and so on. I preferred non-for-profit spaces. I'm not saying these decisions were good or bad, but the entire climate at the time was such. Naturally, things are changing. On the slide, you can see the gallery representations for their distribution for the sample. And you can see as well that the youngest generation is represented more than the older one. You can as well see that more men are represented than women. And gender imbalance is a permanent feature of the market. Market discriminates women, as we know. You can as well see the density of the representation, and you can see that only 2 artists from the sample have high density, that is more than 5 galleries, and they're both men. These 2 artists are Braco Dimitrijević and David Maljković. What I need to mention is, of course, that this sample is not representative for the artists from Croatia, for the entire artistic population, because I was focusing on the artists that do have some kind of connection with the international sphere. And one of the criteria for selecting the artist was being represented by a foreign gallery. So the number of artists that are not represented in Croatia is much higher. The galleries that are representing artists are mainly foreign, apart from Cetina's case that I was mentioning earlier, and some Croatian galleries that were founded but then stopped being active after a while. After Italian, it is mostly German and American galleries that are representing the artists, and they range from the elite galleries to the less established ones, and I will mention only several galleries that are representing more artists from Croatia. Mihaela Štok is the gallery who is representing 6 of them, and that is the highest number, and the fact is even emphasized on her website. As you can see, for the past years, the gallery focused more on Central and Eastern European art, especially contemporary Croatian artists. The link was established through Slaven Tolj, through the artist, while he was still directing Art Radionica Lazareti in Dubrovnik and participated at Vienna Fair. After Štok, it is Gregor Podnar, who together with Frank Elbac from Paris and Epai Visor from Valencia is one of the rare galleries at the higher end of the market that is representing more artists from Croatia. In case of Frank Elbac, it was also the artistic factor that was important. Elbac got to know Julie Kniefer, who moved to Paris in the 90s, and through him he got to know Gorgona and beyond. And the relevance of artistic recommendation was also emphasized by previous empirical researchers such as Stuart Plattner or Olaf Welthuis, for example. The remaining representations are individual stories. All of these galleries you can see as well on the networks, and the networks were constructed to explore the connections between the galleries, between the institutions and the artists, in this case commercial institutions, during the entire period under consideration. I will just give some very brief explanation of the networks. They contain 2 types of nodes. As you can see, artists are represented by red circles and blue squares represent institutions, and they are sized proportionally to their degree centrality. That is the number of ties each node has. In this case, the number of exhibitions each artist participated in. I will only briefly go through the networks for different generations. You can see the mentioned galleries as connectors on the network of the artists born before 1960. In the case of artists born in the 60s, they are more disconnected, and many artists have their individual networks and are not connected to the group on the left, which is connected mainly to Vienna Fair, which had a particular focus on Eastern Europe. While the artists that are born after 70 are more connected again. Due to the reasons of legibility, I didn't open all the node labels, just the connections. But you can see that in their case, Italy is truly important, and both for galleries and art fairs, which is rather interesting since Italy is not an important player in the global market. It represents only 1% of the sales, of global sales. And mostly these collaborations were initiated when the artists either passed through the West or moved to the West, apart from the cases that kind of started through artist recommendation that I already mentioned before, or the cases that were kind of mediated by Slovenian actors, for example, representation of Igor Grubic by Italian gallery La Veronica Contemporanea was initiated at Artissima in Turin, where he participated with Škuc. And now I will finally pass finally pass to the differences in career paths of represented and unrepresented artists, and I will read this part because I believe that otherwise I'm going to run out of time. I wanted to say something a bit more profound, but didn't work. I must emphasize again that I'm focusing only on those trajectories that are connected to the international sphere and that represent a certain post-1989 change. So the speed and the regularity of the represented artist movement through the international field, as well as the progression of their careers, thus different from those of the unrepresented artists. And on the slide you can see the basic characteristics that I will mention further on. And I will focus only on several representatives of the patterns. For the pattern of represented artists, David Maljković is an exceptional example. He started collaborating with Anne Gallery from Amsterdam in 2004 after the postgraduate studies at Rijksakademie. The same year, he participated for the first time in the exhibition curated by VHV from Zagreb, and the exhibitions were in Zagreb and abroad. And the following year begins the ascent of his exhibition activity. The number of countries he exhibited rose from 4 to 15, the number of exhibitions from 5 to 23, and it kept on raising later on as well. No other artist in my sample had a comparable expansion in every respect. Number of exhibitions, number of countries, and number of gallery representations. And the same 2005, he already had a museum solo at Van Abbe in Eindhoven. And the future sequence reads quite clearly from his CV. Almost every year he participates in elite fairs, biennials, one or more at least, has a solo exhibition in a renowned exhibition space, in a private gallery and a museum solo, and more or less every second year is elite private gallery added to his network of representations, which is now counting 7 of them. So he has a balanced presence in various geographical zones, but he lives and works in Zagreb, which is a post-1989 change. And the fact that he is living on the periphery is enabled by a network of galleries that are representing them globally. And all the artists that are given on the slide are still those who are living in Zagreb, apart from Vlatka Horvat, who relocated to the west. So he has a balanced presence in the institutional sphere and on the dealer market, and is an example of the homology at the highest level. And his career was constructed at the intersection of top-level market and institutional sphere. Similar on a more modest model is the case of Igor Eškinja, without such a sharp ascent or regularity, but still the expansion and internationalization of his activity coincide with the beginning of gallery representation. And we can read the same sequence: Biennale, art fair, solo exhibition in a non-commercial and commercial space, thus a balanced presence in both spheres. Similar to them are Dam Iročko and Vlatka Horvat. The paths of these artists are marked by an ascent of the exhibition activity and geographical spread only several years after the artists initiated their activity. And they're all correlated with the beginning of gallery representation. On the other hand, the paths of unrepresented international artists whose careers were developing outside the private gallery system and from Croatia, or artists who are represented today but their international trajectories were not influenced by the market, show less regularity and incomparably less abrupt increase of activity. For both Mladen Stilinović and Sanja Iveković, although their activity is marked by a monumental expansion, in particular after 2008, it occurred far less suddenly and after years of their activity, and the market recognition followed only after the institutional consecration. So, due to the absence of market involvement in the international careers of the artists from Croatia born before 1970, we have kind of observed two historical developments running in parallel. the careers that Raymond Moulin described the slow development characteristic of the 70s and 80s, and the speeded up careers of the ever younger artist characteristic of the 90s. The later are marked by much faster entry into the museum, opposite to the previous, where the commercial success follows after the institutional. So it is by and large due to an uneven involvement of the market that the international paths of the artists from Croatia are not standardized. Unlike, for example, in France, where Martin found that young artists go through the same stages and that career paths are similar. So irregularities mark the international paths of unrepresented artists and all below the top level. In addition to Ivekovic and Stilinovic, the artists that kind of destabilize the definition of international artist, which presupposes the presence of an artist both in commercial sphere and institutional, are Andrea Kulunc, Slaven Tolja, and Igor Grubic. They are mostly invisible on the market or started being visible after they already gained a considerable reputation internationally. And their trajectories fit less neatly into the definition of international artist or international career, which is based on the top-level Western artist, but at times still suggested as universally valid. However, the examples like this are more exceptional than not, but within small population of international artists from Croatia, their number is not insignificant. And I'm by no means trying to correct the conclusions that are based on much larger artistic population. My intention was primarily to point to inelasticity of some of the existing definitions. Moreover, these examples point to the fact that two universes, market and institutions, do not necessarily overlap. And in that respect, my findings are consistent with the empirical studies of Bull and Wugenik and Rudolph that I mentioned earlier, that measure the level of homology between the market and institutions, while they depart from the market imperialist perspective. When I look at the generation of artists born after 60 and 70, I see that the choices of private galleries and institutions overlap most intensely at the very top and separate below, which is consistent with mentioned studies, as for example the pyramid that the Bull constructed that you can see here. I don't know how well you can see, but he took the rankings of artifacts and art prices, and the choices of operators overlapped most intensely at the top, while they tended to separate below. So that is the case with the artists from Croatia as well. Maljković and Eškinja and Horvat and Očko are the cases that would be situated toward the peak, and the choices would kind of depart below that. And descending below that level, there is a stronger polarization between the market and the institutional sphere, while internationally more established artists all gravitate towards the non-commercial sphere. And the more pronounced commercial size is followed by a narrower scope of the international. It's connected to longer-term residency in one of the Western countries. It is not correlated with age, but it is correlated with medium, painting mostly, and and object-based practices, while the more institutional, more strongly pronounced institutional side is correlated, is not correlated with the residence in one of the Western countries, but the success via the institutional channels and from Croatia is lengthier and does adhere to an age hierarchy. But what remains as a fact, which goes almost without saying in this part of the world, is that the art world is not to be judged solely from the market perspective, in particular if one is to see outside the centers. Having said that, all internationally consecrated artists that are not visible on the market are either from the pre-1960 generation or 1960 generation, while all the internationally consecrated artists of the 70s are also visible on the market. So, as Đukić said, things are definitely changing. And just to conclude, I added some directions for future research that you can see on the slide, which is mainly broadening the sample, updating it, and integrating a more qualitative dimension into research, and as well comparing some choices of galleries and institutions via the networks. That would